If you are engaging in talk therapy, conventional talk therapy, and you feel that it's not working for you, if you're not getting the results that you want, I wanted to know a couple of things. Number one, there's nothing wrong with you. Number two, you're certainly not alone. If you are a fan of the mind, brain, and hypnosis, plus if you like stories about healing, you've come to the right place because here, Dr. Flavio, I explain hypnosis. Just last week, this woman called me up. She had been going to talk therapy with her husband for 1 whole year. And all they talk about, she told me, this is her telling me, all they talk about is agreements and communication skills. In other words, they reduce the entirety of the human experience, particularly in the context of the marriage, to a set of agreements. If I agree to do this, you must agree to do that. Listen, not even the therapist, him in this case was a man, not even the therapist himself lives that way. Humans don't live that way. We're not computers. We don't live by agreements alone because we have emotions and we get unhinged. So it just doesn't work that way. And when it comes to communication skills, and this is how you should speak, and this is what you should say, that's what you should not say, if you realize, if you stop to think about this, this is a completely endless process because every situation is different. So if a situation happens, you go back to your therapist, you describe the situation, assuming that we cannot, but assuming that we could describe the situation exactly as it happened. Nobody can, but suppose we did. Even then, we're going to discuss what we should have said instead. That is not very useful because that same exact situation will never repeat itself again. Therefore, you're going to come back next week and say, well, something else happened this week that had nothing to do with what happened last week. Let's discuss communication skills all over again. So this woman was frustrated. The reason why she called me was because she came downstairs one morning and the husband was all upset and hinged. And she asked him, honey, what's wrong? So, honey, what's wrong is a question that perhaps when you see your husband crying or upset, honey, what's wrong might not be that wrong of a question. So they go through a series of sessions, 3 or 4 sessions, discussing her, he snaps at her, of course, and then when they come into therapy, he says, well, look, if she sees me crying, the question, honey, what's wrong, is so offensive. Obviously, something is wrong, but she's not being supportive. She's not being understanding. Now, mind you, this woman had no idea what was going on. So they keep on, basically, both of them, the therapist and the husband, gaslighting her, pretending that the problem was really the way in which she asked the question. Look at how terrible this is, honey, what's wrong? This is after a year of therapy, right? So they have this blowout because she saw the guy crying and asked him, honey, what's wrong? Now the issue is the way she asked the question. So I asked her, okay, what's going on in the marriage? Why you're in therapy? It's been a year. How come you're not moving forward? Well, we talk about agreements. I have to agree to do this. He needs to agree to do that. We don't always keep our agreements, But, apparently I'm the problem because of my communication skills are lacking. This is what she's telling me, right? So they come to see me, and I look straight into the guy's eyes, and I say, listen, I don't know anything about you. I am not judging. I'm no better than you. God knows I'm a mess, whatever. No, there's no judgment here. We're not here to judge. We're here to get things done. But I'll tell you one thing that I know and you know, and that is that if your wife asks you, honey, what's wrong, and you blow up, the problem is not with what she's asking. The problem is that you are at the very, very edge of your ability to hold on to a secret. Because look, when we have open communication with somebody, a question of that nature does not cause a blow up. This guy was so stressed. To begin with, he was already crying when she came in and asked the question. Second, the question itself drove him over the edge. So I said, look, number one, you are crying. From what I heard from both of you, you have not been addressing that in your talk therapy. Number two, it is just a question. If that drove you over the edge and you think that that's the problem, then you are very close to the edge and you've already crossed that edge. That means that you're extremely highly stressed out and you have not been addressing it because you guys have been talking in circles about communication skills and agreements. Clearly, you're not getting to the root of the issue. How can you say that Dr. So-and-so is the best? Yeah, Dr. So-and-so might be really good, but you guys have been going there for a year and you're still here. So why don't you tell me what's really going on? And to make a long story short, I'm not laughing at the situation. I think it's tragic. I'm just saying that, of course, I've been doing this for 30 years, whatever, no, so it takes a little bit of skill there. But the point is the guy was having an affair. The wife didn't know. The girlfriend or the affair lady got pregnant and he didn't know how to break the news to the wife. So for a year in therapy, he was having an affair. She never knew about it. He never disclosed it. They never got to the core of the apple, And so, look, it doesn't take much, If you're a hypnotist, if you're in therapy for a year talking about agreements and stuff, clearly you're harming the patient, right? I mean, so if you are in the situation where you don't feel that you're any better, you're not broken. In fact, statistics, studies show that about half the people who go into talk therapy do not do well at all. And out of those 50% who don't get any improvement, half of those people, in other words, 25% of all the people who go into talk therapy, they claim they get worse as a result of talk therapy. I wrote a whole book on this topic, When All Else Fails, called The Hypnotist, because one of the problems that happens, modern neuroscience shows that the more you talk about problems, the more, it's called Hebb's rule, the more you cement those neuronal pathways and the more ingrained that those ideas become. It's all in the book here, you can pick it up. But what I'm saying is that this idea of talking about problems, okay, tell me how you feel about this. This is proving neuroscientifically to make the problem worse. And what they're really hoping to do there is to build a relationship with the client and maybe allow for some insight to take place. But you take this example, in the example of about half the people, according to their own studies, not my data, their data, according to their own data, about half of the people who engage in this process of talking about problems do not do better, and a quarter of them do worse. So my data is skewed, of course, because the people I see as a hypnotherapist are not the people for whom psychotherapy is working. Of course, if it's working for you to talk about your problems, if that works, I never get to see that person because it's already working for them elsewhere, and I respect that, and I admire that, I like that. By definition, the people I see are these atrocious stories, such as the one I just told you. A whole year talking about agreements and communication skills. Come on, the guy was having an affair behind her back. The girlfriend was pregnant. He was stressed out. In other words, we're not dealing with the real problem here. So a whole year talking about communication skills and he hasn't been able to tell her, look, I'm seeing somebody else so that we can get to the core of the apple, so we can get to the issue, to the true issue here. And you call that therapy? I think that that's very harmful. In fact, that both of these people felt deceived by this Dr. So-and-so therapist guy that all he talked about was agreements and communication skills. So my point is not to criticize any other profession. God knows it's not my point here. Because it is true that according to their studies, it is true that about half the people benefit from this process of talking about problems endlessly. But the other half of you guys out there are not getting any benefit. You need something a little bit more, you need something a bit more direct. We need to get into the unconscious. We need to see what's really going on there. We need to have a conversation about what's really the problem here. And talking about problems on the surface level is not going to do it. So half of you out there are not getting benefit from talk therapy, and it is that pool of people who end up calling our office, and some of them we end up helping. I just feel bad for a person who spent a year talking to a therapist. I think this is gaslighting. The definition of gaslighting. You have a problem in communication. How could you ask your husband, honey, what's wrong? When in reality, this guy is having an affair and his girlfriend is pregnant. I think that's gaslighting from both of them, both the husband and the therapist, because the therapist, in this case, I wasn't there. Fair game, I wasn't there. I don't know, I cannot judge. But according to what the couple told me, this is their phrase, I quote, all we talk about are agreements and communication skills. I think that's called gaslighting. Because from their own report to me, they never had a conversation. What's really going on here? They never got to that. What's really going on here? They never got to that. So I am really, really sorry if you're in that situation. But if you're looking for an alternative, if you're looking for solutions, maybe we can do something different. Maybe we can get to the meat of the issue, the core of the apple. Maybe we can get to what's really happening and solve the problem once and for all.